Hi class, welcome today. We're going to get started. We're going to talk about Muhammad and the founding of Islam, but if you could, I'd like you to, just as we would in class, just open with the word of prayer only. Since this is a screencast, just open the word of prayer by yourself before we begin, and I pray that the Spirit will teach you that which I'm not saying. He can teach you much better than I can. And so, yeah, do you just go ahead and pause the video? Okay, here we go. Let's start. Let's talk about Muhammad today. What do you know about him? And that was one of the I-Learn questions that I asked, and I wanted to know. You notice I didn't put his face on there in respect of Islam because most conservative sects and they don't want to have his face on there, and so we just put his name on there, Muhammad, and. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about him. The year he was born, he will grow up an orphan. His mom will die his mom Amina will die when he's 6 years old, according to the life of Muhammad. And the year he was born, it was around 570 AD, and it says in a concise history of the Middle East that an Ethiopian army marched northward from Yemen with a baggage train of elephants and tried to take Mecca. It failed, and legend has it some birds flew over Ethiopians and pelted them with stones. And by the way, in the life of Muhammad, which is a really close source to this time period, by Aisha, he said that God sent upon them birds from the sea like swallows and starlings, and each of the birds carried 3 stones like peas and lentils, and one in their beak and 2 between their claws, and everyone that was hit died. And so the Ethiopians, they were whipping their elephants, and Abraha, who's the head of this group that were trying to conquer Mecca, he came with his lead elephant, and they were whipping it, and it just kept turning around and going back. And finally, it says in the quote, it says they withdrew back to Yemen, where they came from. And the Meccans saw this as a lucky year, and most people think that Muhammad was born in that year, the year of the elephants. And in 610 AD in Mount Hira, or Jabal Hira, Jabal meaning mount, it lies about 2 miles from the Kaaba in Mecca, and near the top of it is a small cave. If you look really close in that picture, all those little white things, those are people that are walking up the mountainside during the Hijrah, during the pilgrimage to Mecca, and they go all the way up there to where the cave is. And the cave is only about 12 feet deep. It's about 1.5 meters wide, 5 feet wide. And it was here that Prophet Muhammad received his first revelations. Here's a close-up of the cave.
Muhammad's marriage to Khadija brought him personal happiness, but it did not mean that he was content with his life or the ways of the world in which he lived.
He, from age 25 to 40, should have been the prime of his life. Got Khadija, wealthy, beautiful Arab woman who trusted him. He'd got 4 beautiful daughters. He had 2 sons born of him which didn't survive. He'd become a man of respect. He was from a respectful clan anyway, but now he had the family to back him. And in a funny way, he'd risen to the top of his society and had become sort of sickened at what that meant with the sort of violence of clan society and the way that wealth could buy you anything.
The fact was that Muhammad was not happy. He himself had experienced the extremes of Arab tribal society, and the iniquities of tribal life disturbed him and made him uneasy. By all accounts, he'd reached a moment of personal crisis.
He was really upset by the bad treatment of the poor and the weak and the downtrodden people in society. There's definitely this great ontological anxiety he had about, the big questions. Why are we here? What's the purpose of life? How do we make sense of the world around us?
I believe he was looking for a connection, just like Abraham was looking when he was young, just like Moses was looking when he was wandering the valleys, just like all the other prophets of the Old and the New Testament were looking.
Probably at the heart of it also is the most rooted issue for many who begin to question their society, and even question, if you will, the morality of the society and the religious values they were raised with, which get down to the nature of God.
According to Muslim tradition, at this time Muhammad had begun to make regular spiritual retreats. Throughout the year he would take Khadija and his family up into the mountains above Mecca to seek peace and quiet and pray. What was Muhammad after? What was he seeking and what was he doing? He was certainly troubled, and he was seeking some kind of spiritual truth. Muhammad's spiritual retreats were becoming more intense and ever more frequent, and they were devoted to really intense personal reflection and meditation. And he chose this spot, Jabal Nur, which is a hill far up and a really challenging climb up from the city down below. And he would climb all the way to the very top, to a cave known as Ghahira. And it was there that he would spend hours, in fact, whole days and nights, in ever more intense and fervent meditation. Until one day, in the year 610, something happened that would transform not just his life, but the entire history of the world.
So the angel Gabriel appears to him, and according to the life of Muhammad, hugging him almost choked him. It says hugging him till almost choked. This is what the angel ordered him. The angel said to him, recite in the name of thy Lord who created man from a clinging substance. Read, and thy Lord is the most bounteous, who teacheth by the pen, teacheth man that which he knew not. So wherever he looked after this experience, he saw the angel looking back at him, the angel Gabriel. And the angel would say, "Oh, Muhammad, you are the messenger of God, and I am the angel Gabriel." And Muhammad, fearing that he was being attacked by some evil spirit, by a jinn or genie, as we would say in English, he fled down the mountain in terror, and the voice called after him again, "Oh, Muhammad, you are the messenger of God." And he was very comforted by it. It was mentioned in the video that he married Khadija. He was 25 years old when he married her. She was 40 years old. She was a very wealthy, respected businesswoman who she hired him because she knew that he had a reputation for being trustworthy and being noble. And she broke tribal tradition and asked him to marry her. And he loved her dearly, and he would not marry any other wives while she was alive. And they would have five children, I believe. And later on, he would marry Abu Bakr, his best friend's daughter, after his wife died. And she once said, her name was Aisha, and she once said, was Khadija the only woman worthy of your love? And I love what he said. She believed in me when no one else did. She accepted Islam when people rejected me. And she helped and comforted me when there was no one else to lend me a helping hand. And she once said to him, "You are kind and considerate toward your kin. You help the poor, the forlorn, and bear the burdens. You are striving to restore the high moral qualities." And she really reached out and strengthened him and lifted him up. In S. Michael Wilcox, The 10 Great Souls I Want to Meet in Heaven, I love what he teaches when he talks about how Muhammad's one of his heroes that he wants to meet someday in the next life. He says in that book, after talking about Muhammad and Khadija, his wife, he says, "It seems great men called of God often have women who help them fulfill their call." Now, I think the Lord outlined in this came from Doctrine and Covenants, section 25, and this idea that the Lord, Brother Wilcox says, the Lord outlined the major contribution, Emma, that she would offer in the grand unfolding, the restoration was to lift him, to support him, because he had such a heavy burden on his back, like Muhammad, because he said that he had received a revelation and he had received a book, and an angel had visited him, and he was mocked and persecuted and eventually lost his life for it. But I love what the Lord said about Emma: thou art an elect lady, and I've called you. The office of thy calling shall be for a comfort unto thy servant, my servant Joseph, thy husband. And Jesus, Mary and Martha would often comfort Jesus. He was often in the company of women like Mary Magdalene. In Judges chapter 3, verse 8, when Barak didn't want to face the Canaanite chariots until he was worried, it'd take the Israelite army to go fight him. And finally, Deborah, she came to him and said, if thou wilt go with me, then I will go. And one thing that he said that I thought was interesting, he said the four most noble women to Muhammad, he said were Khadijah, the Pharaoh's daughter, and Mary, and Fatima. And Fatima, by the way, is his daughter, and Mary, the mother of Jesus. So one time he had a cousin, or Khadijah, his wife had a cousin. He was a Christian, and he was one of those whom Khadijah Muhammad had turned to for advice, and his name was Waraka. And when he heard of the Muhammad's experience, he said, surely by him in whose hand is Waraka's soul, thou art the prophet of this people. There hath come unto thee the greatest Namus, or Angel Gabriel, who came unto Moses. Now, when living in Mecca, Allah carried him in a vision to Jerusalem. And some say it was a physical journey, and others say it was a vision. Aisha, one of the prophet's wives, she said the apostle's body remained in Mecca, but he traveled in spirit to Jerusalem. And when he went there, according to the life of Muhammad, and by the way, the translation, Ishaq Sirat Rasul Allah's translation, is the closest to the time period. He knew some of the people that were witnesses there, that experienced, that were around the prophet. And I want to say this was written about 40, 50 years after the prophet died. So it's pretty close to the source. And according to this vision here, he said, according to the life of Muhammad, one witness said that Barak, the animal whose every stride, it was the horse that carried him from Mecca to Jerusalem, the spiritual horse, carried it as far as the eye could reach, on which the prophets before him used to ride, was brought to the apostle, and he was mounted on it. His companion Gabriel went with him to see the wonders between heaven and earth until he came to Jerusalem's temple. And there he found Abraham, the friend of God, Moses, and Jesus, assembled with a company of the prophets, and he prayed with them. And the mosque, the Dome of the Rock today, is built on that spot where Barak took him up into the seven heavens. And inside of the Dome of the Rock, you see this right here, this big stone in the center. And this is the place that where the Muslims believe that he rode up. And also, this is the place where Jews believe that Abraham sacrificed Isaac. Muslims would say that it's where Abraham was to sacrifice Ishmael, not Isaac. Well, when he came there to the gates of heaven, he was offered 3 vessels of milk. Wine, and water. And so I'm just want you to think about this for a minute. Which one do you think he took? So it's like a test. So I pondered this. Was it the milk, wine, water? Well, I heard a voice saying, when these were offered to me, if he takes the water, he'll be drowned. Wine, he will go astray. And if he takes the milk, he will be rightly guided. So I took the vessel containing milk. Of course he would. And he drank it. And then Gabriel, the angel, said, you have been rightly guided. And then a ladder was brought down, he said, finer than ever he's ever seen. And he called it the Gate of the Watchers. And an angel called Ismail was in charge of it. And there were 12,000 angels, according to one witness who was, I can't remember if this was Muhammad that said this, a witness that was saying what Muhammad said in the book, The Life of Muhammad. And he was asked if he had been given a mission. He said, yeah. And he says, well, welcome. Well, while he's there, the keeper of, I want to say the gate of hell is named Malik. And Malik showed Muhammad hell. And he sees the flames blazing high in the air. And Muhammad said, I asked Gabriel to order him to send them back to the flames back to where they came from. It scared him to death. And so the flames went back. And then he started to ascend up to the 7 heavens. And some Muslims believe that this heaven that he would go to was the celestial Kaaba, like the Kaaba, the cube. Kaaba means cube that you see in Mecca, that the people circumambulate around. And went too far. So when he entered the lowest heaven, he sees a man sitting there, and it's Adam. And Adam is watching the spirits that are coming in. And he's in the lowest heaven, and he's judging between good and bad people. And then he's taken up to the 2nd heaven. He saw 2 maternal cousins, Jesus, son of Mary, and John, Zechariah. And then he goes up to the next heaven, 3rd heaven, and he sees Joseph, who was sold into Egypt. And then in the 4th heaven, or 6th heaven, there was a dark man with a hooked nose. And he said, this was my brother Moses. And then he finally gets up to the highest heaven where Abraham, as we would say, was there and sitting on a throne at the gate of the mortal mansion. And he said, never had I seen a man more like myself. This was my father, Abraham. And interesting, according to the life of Muhammad, he sees this beautiful woman, and they took him into paradise. He sees she got dark damsel with dark red lips. And he's like, who does she belong to? She is beautiful. She pleases me to look at, you know. Finally, they said she belongs to Zayd bi Haritha. And Zayd was a captured Christian Arab whom Muhammad adopted. And he says, yeah, that's the girl for that boy that you adopted back home. So when he comes back from the vision, he will go and tell Zayd the good news. You have a really beautiful girl waiting for you. Well, on his return, he passes by Moses, and Moses says, how many times have you prayed? He said 50. And he says, prayer is a weighty matter, and your people are weak. They can't pray that much. Go back and tell them. So he says, go back and tell them. Go back to your Lord and ask him to reduce the number for you and your community. So it went on until only 5 prayers for the whole day. And to this day, Muslims, you heard the call of prayer at the beginning of this video. You'll hear that before the sun comes up. You'll hear it after the sun comes up. And you'll hear it throughout the day into the evening and into the night. I just want to point something out about Muhammad. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints, the question is, we believe in prophets, and was Muhammad a prophet of God? Well, the First Presidency said, as you read last time or this time, that great religious leaders of this world, such as Muhammad, received a portion of God's light, and moral truths were given to them by God to enlighten whole nations and to bring a higher level of understanding to individuals. And I think this is important. Now, we believe that God didn't give Muhammad keys and authority to restore the gospel of Jesus Christ to the earth as he did through the prophet Joseph Smith. But we do believe that God inspired him to lift a nation of people who were steeped deeply into polytheism and to worship of many gods, and they were entrenched in wickedness and adultery and drunkenness. And he will take them and he will lift the whole Arabian Peninsula. He will unite them together, and he will lift them to a higher level of spirituality. And I like what Elder Ezra Taft Benson said. He said that God the Father uses good men. Perhaps the Lord needs such men on the outside of his church to help bring it along. He says they can do more good for the causes where the Lord has placed them than anywhere else. The Lord will open their eyes in due time. Well, if we were together, I would ask this question: of all that you learned about Muhammad, what was the most interesting, insightful, and impressive? And honestly, I'm sharing with you what I think is the most interesting, of all the things I could read and that I have read and studied. It just, as I read and studied him, he's a man that I want to meet and talk with in heaven. And Muhammad wasn't perfect. No prophet is. And in fact, many of his critics, they'll point to his marriage to Zainab, and she was married to his adopted son Zayd. And there was a new Quranic revelation that came to Muhammad that allowed Zayd to divorce her. But even Aisha, she was quick to attack Muhammad for marrying Zainab. But Muhammad believed that his marriages were prescribed for him by God, and he always enjoyed he loved being around women. And someone say, "Oh, he was a pedophile," but because he married his best friend Abu Baker's daughter. He was married to her when she was 6 years old, and then she went to live with him when she was 9. That was part of the culture back then. And I want to point out too that you can find inconsistencies in his behavior. Like, for example, he forbade wailing at funerals until his infant son died, and he forgave many of the foes he faced in battle, but not the poets who made fun of his mission, which is interesting. So I like what Goldschmidt in his concise history of the Middle East says. He says prophets were human beings, not plaster saints. And so, yeah, he had weaknesses. But I think if you look at, when you read the Quran and you read the sayings and the Sunnah, the doings of the Prophet, and Hadith, the sayings of the Prophet, and you'll see that there are things about him that truly were inspired. He was inspired with truth. I want to just, one of my TA, Hannah, made this video for you, and I'd like you to just, these are the sayings of Muhammad. Thank you, Hannah Murphy. That gets Academy Award from me. All right. This is one of my favorite quotes by him, that the most perfect in faith amongst believers is he who is best in manner and kindest to his wife. Well, if we had time together again, I'd ask you what are some insights that you gleaned about Muhammad's life. I just want to say his followers found him trustworthy. They found him righteous. They found him pious, compassionate, honest, and he lived the ideal life for a Muslim. He provided a pattern for all people to live a good life. And some say he is the living Quran. And he was to them what our prophet, President Russell M. Nelson, would be to us. His sunnah, or his example, it became the pattern that others would just try to emulate. So, and I like what S. Michael Wilcox says in his 10 Great Souls. He says, that terrible things have been done in the name of Islam should not surprise us, for horrible things have been done in the name of Christianity. We cannot judge a religion on these matters, but must turn to the origins and try to grasp the essence of the men and women who brought it forth and the spirit of his teachings. You look to the life, to look to the things that he did and the things he said, and you can't help but believe he was inspired. And you look to our prophet Joseph Smith, and critics will fire all kinds of bullets to his way, but you look at the things that he did and the things he taught and the things he testified of, the things he brought forth, the keys of this kingdom, and the Book of Mormon, and the Doctrine and Covenants, and temples, and families being sealed forever and for eternity. The proof is in the pudding, definitely. Well, let's talk a little bit just about the creation of the Islamic community. In Goldschmidt's book, A Concise History, he says, those who believed in Muhammad as God's messenger came to be known as Muslims. And the Arabic word Muslim means one who submits to God's will. The act of submission is Islam, which of course became the name of the religion. So he's living he's living in Mecca, and for almost 10 years, he struggled preaching and gathering and talking about his vision and receiving revelations that would eventually become the Quran, and people mocking him, teasing him. One person whipped him with a goat uterus, some person throwing dust on him. But he had a lot of early converts. And Ali, his cousin and son-in-law, was probably his first convert. And Abu Bakr, his very close friend, a very well-respected friend in the community, and future father-in-law, because he'll marry his daughter Aisha. And Abu Bakr will become the first caliph, or rightly guided one, the leader of the Muslims after Muhammad dies. Well, in 619, this was a sad year for him, because Qajida will die, and then Abu Talib, his uncle, who protects him from the Meccans who are trying to persecute and kill him, they both die. And I like what Sir John Glubb in The Life of Times of Muhammad said. He said, Muhammad forever remembered Qajida with love, affection, and gratitude. During her brief illness, he kept a night-long vigil, nursing her, comforting her, and praying for her. He told her that God had built for her a palace of pearls in paradise. Her death filled his heart with deep sorrow. She was buried in Hujun, above Mecca. After the burial, the apostle himself smoothed the earth on her grave. And only weeks after she passed, after Qajida's wife, after she had died, by the way, he names it the year of sadness. And his daughter, after some people had persecuted him, his daughter said, Father, she's very upset and worried about him. And he said, daughter, don't weep. Allah will save your father. He'll protect your father from the enemies of his religion and his mission. And so the Quraysh tribe that was living in Mecca, they just keep trying to hurt him more and more. And one day, Allah, he learns that they're going to try to kill him, and that's when he's told to flee. And Now, before he flees, though, let me just say that in 620 AD, north of Mecca, there's a place called Medina. Yathrib is what they call it. And so people would always come down to Mecca to go to the Kaaba to worship there. There's like 360 gods in the Kaaba that they would come to worship, and they come from all over the Arabian Peninsula. And these Jews and also people, natives that lived in the city of Medina, come down. They were having a lot of fights and battle, and they needed someone to come and kind of be the mediator between these feuding tribes. And they hear about his wisdom, and he will come up with what's called the Constitution of Medina. And the music's playing because I'm going to shut it off. Because if we were in class and we didn't have COVID-19, then you'd be, I'll give you some time to just kind of listen to the music and read through this. And it's just interesting. I'll just let you kind of just peruse through it real quick. Just read a couple phrases. He created this to bring unity among these people, and they well respected him for it. So the Muslim identity in bond, it was no longer to be by tribal ties, but by religious faith. And the Jews were a separate community, yet they allied with the Muslim Ummah, or community, the people. And they still had their cultural and religious autonomy, but this constitution helped bring them together, at least for a while. And when the Quraysh plotted to kill Muhammad, as I mentioned, Ali slept in his bed. Or did I don't know if I mentioned this, but Ali, his cousin, was sleeping in his bed as if he was Muhammad, because he didn't want anybody to kill him. And so that's when Muhammad was finally given the direction by Gabriel to flee and to go to Medina. And this is what we call the Hijra, or in English, it would probably be the flight, the exodus, and so he will go from Mecca to Medina and flee. And to this day, that is a very sacred day. Well, the tribal Moors of Mecca branded the Muslims as traitors. And they would still persecute him. And so he would raid their caravans and take and loot from them. And that was part of the culture back then. And in the Battle of Badr near Medina, they were greatly outnumbered. The Muslims were, but they defeated the Meccan army. And it was the first battle of the monotheist Muslims against the polytheistic Meccans. And God says in the Quran, in Surah chapter 3, he says, Allah helped you at Badr when you were a contemptible little force. Is it not enough for you that the Lord should reinforce you with 3,000 angels sent down upon you? Almost sounds like the story of Elijah. They that be with us are more than they that be with them. And by the way, in 1973, the Arab-Israeli War, when the Egyptians invaded the Sinai Peninsula, they called it the Operation Badr. Well, later on, there will be the Battle of Ahud, and this is where the Mecca defeated the Muslims, and Muhammad's wounded. It's because his archers, he told them to, I can't remember what he told them, but the archers disobeyed him, and because of it, that disobey, they didn't have Allah on their side, and they almost lost the battle. And then there was the Battle of the Ditch, and this is probably a very important battle, because in this particular battle, about thousands of Meccans came, and the only thing that held them back, they came with cavalry on horses and on camels, but Muhammad had them dig this deep and wide trench, and they couldn't get across it. And Muhammad, just an interesting thing about Muhammad By the way, in this battle, there was the Jews of the Banu Qurayza. They were traitors against. They consorted with the Meccans, and the Jewish traders that had agreed to keep that constitution of Medina. They turned and they almost had the prophet killed, and they would be killed for that. Their women would be sold and given to, and children would be spared but enslaved. And so before this, Muhammad would always, interesting, he would celebrate Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, in the fall. And sometime after this, they would feel like that's not long enough, and that's when they would do the Ramadan, the fast for a month, where they would fast during the day and eat and drink at night. But I just want to point out one thing that was interesting, that that Muhammad there and his followers, they would face Jerusalem when they would pray. But after the Jews betrayed him, he'll face Mecca. And Mecca was the direction, or the word in Hebrew, I believe I remember, is Qibla, for prayer. And Mecca was the site for the Muslim pilgrimage, the Hajj. And in all, I think it's interesting, in all today in these mosques, and there's a place, you always find a niche there called the Mirab. And the Mirab shows the direction towards Mecca. Wherever you're at in the world, there's a Mirab in the mosque to show you which way to go. And that's the Mirab in Hagia Sophia in Turkey. And so finally, there's a truce called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah between Muhammad and his followers in Medina and the Meccans in Mecca. And the truce permitted Muslims to kind of to make a pilgrimage to Mecca, to leave Medina and to continue making that pilgrimage to the Kaaba, because they were making pilgrimages to, and we'll talk about this more next time, they were making pilgrimages to the Kaaba even before Muhammad and Islam came along. And so, finally, so that was 628, they made that truce. And then in 630, 2 years later, the Meccans will break the treaty.
The Muslim forces advanced to the outskirts of Mecca. It was a furious siege that lasted for nearly a month. Until, finally, the city fell to Muhammad. In 630 AD, the terrified people of Mecca braced for the onslaught. Muhammad's army was returning home, now 10,000 strong. The vanquished knew the terrible fate that awaited them.
According to the modes of tribal warfare, the Meccans could expect a big revenge. The men are usually killed, women and children are sold into slavery. There's little pity for the loser in a tribal war. Of course, that's standard around the world.
But Muhammad had a surprise in store for the fallen city.
When Muhammad came into Mecca, and not only did not carry out a bloody revenge, but actually embraced the very Meccans who had fought him for 3 years and attempted to annihilate him, it was very shocking to the people in his milieu. So within the very founding of a religion, one finds episodes of great generosity, often extraordinary acts of kindness and mercy.
But not all of Mecca escaped Muhammad's wrath. Flush with victory, his troops marched straight to the Kaaba. 7 times they circled the shrine, as those who had come to seek its protection appealed to their idols. But it was not the pagan people Muhammad had come to destroy. It was their gods. He raised his staff, and the tribal gods of his ancestors smashed into dust.
When Muhammad entered Mecca and entered the shrine and destroyed the idols in the shrine, this is of great cultural and symbolic importance in Islam. By breaking the idols, he was breaking apart the tribal system in which each tribe really had its own independent deity. This was shocking to the Bedouin. This was saying the gods of our fathers are being destroyed. In some sense, you're saying that our fathers themselves were deluded. How can you say this in a tradition in which relationships to one's father and tribe were primary? So this act of iconoclasm then is seen as an act of prophetic violence that has just as much importance in Islamic tradition as Moses' breaking of the tablets when he saw the idolatry at Mount Sinai, or Jesus' casting the money sellers out of the temple.
The destruction of the idols was a new beginning, a breaking from the past and the creation of a powerful new force. Mecca was just the beginning. One after another, the tribes of a nation were summoned to the fold and united under the banner of Islam. A worldwide community of faith was begun, born in an extraordinary alignment of history, personality, and conviction.
And you know, and that all started with revelation. It all started with a vision, and sounds pretty familiar to us in our faith. How the origins of our faith, the matrix, starts back to the vision in 1820 of a boy going to a sacred grove. But for them, it was a young man going into a cave in Mecca. And I like what, there's a book I've read called Turning Points in Middle Eastern History. It's actually, it's called One of the Great Courses, but it's by Eamon Giran. And he says, Muhammad's first revelation, he said, is a turning point among turning points. Without Muhammad's account of his mysterious revelation in a mountain cave, there would have been no prophetic mission, no preaching to the masses, no commerce, no Islam, and impossible to imagine alteration in global history. And he says that Muhammad's legacy is that the entire Arabian Peninsula was united. He introduced personal accountability, he outlawed the practice of female infanticide, and provided women with legal rights to property, to divorce, and to remarry. And polytheism all but disappeared. And I'll just say in conclusion that, I'm grateful, as the first presidency says, that God has inspired great men like Muhammad and Confucius and Plato and Socrates and great men because he loves all his children on this earth, and he inspires them to lift them to higher levels of spirituality. And I'm grateful to know that the prophet Joseph Smith is a prophet of God, and that he was called of God to be a prophet in our day, and that he translated the Book of Mormon, and that it is an ancient record it is another testament of Jesus Christ. And I want you to know that I know that he's a prophet today, and President Nelson is our prophet. And so I'm grateful for that, and grateful to be a part of this true gospel. But I'm grateful to know that God loves all his children and is working with everybody. And I say it in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.